once again to Fresh Take Culture and Comics. I normally start these episodes with a little bit of housekeeping, give you some news, some upcoming things. But I'm so excited about this show. We're going to jump in really quick here. We are going to be breaking down the first two, kind of three. We'll keep three spoiler free, but episodes of the Sandman series on Netflix. I've got a first time guest. I'm going to bring her in just a second here. Of course, as always, hit the subscribe, notification, share. You know the business. You know how it is. Really love how this community is growing. We have been talking about doing our 200 follower giveaway here on YouTube, and we're getting like crazy close on our 800 follower on TikTok. So if you follow me one and not the other, please do, and I'll send you some goodies hopefully. Listen, I'm gonna jump right to it. If you haven't watched this Sandman series at all, you can probably listen to our top line thoughts at the beginning here. But as we get into spoilers, I will announce that, so you can dip out if you just want to get like a taste of our overall strokes. But as we get into some of the details, best that you watch a few episodes. But I will give you all a heads up. So with that, I'm going to bring in our guest. She's first time here on Fresh Take Culture and Comics. I tracked her down on TikTok and I've just thought her account is fantastic. She's got great takes on things, and I think you are going to really enjoy her too. So let me bring in here. All right, Jackie at Chattering Jacks.
Hey,
on TikTok. Welcome. Thank you for being a guest.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome. I'm super excited.
No worries. Yeah, our account has a lot of overlap, I noticed. And I really thought you brought some great insight and takes on things, and I would love to talk about this show with you. So, briefly, just before we talk about Sandman at all, what is your relationship? Are you a comic collector, a reader? Has that always been a thing? Is it newer in your life? Just what's your relationship to comic books on the whole?
I mean, I don't know what I do is called comic collection, just because I'm way too chaotic for the organization that takes, but I do have my fair share. I think if a comic collector ever came and saw the way I treated my collection, I think
there are no wrong ways to collect.
I think they would be horrified. But I've been a pretty avid comic book graphic novel reader since my early teen years. But yeah, I've been reading for a while. As for the Sandman, I feel like it's one of those tentpole cornerstone, I want to call it pieces of literature, really, that you're always supposed to read. Sometimes they're covered in schools, but for whatever reason, I just never got around to it. And I have it. I actually own it, but I actually haven't gotten around to it until now, until recently.
Yeah, well, I mean, my hope is it's a series that I like in the late 80s or whatever. Maybe it was 1990 when I because I didn't catch the first few story arcs, but somewhere in the middle of the run got in and then was catching up in real time and fell in love very quickly. And it stayed with me, but I've seen as the decades have gone by, new readers constantly finding it and having if you didn't audience, if you haven't checked out my previous episode, I talk a little bit about the series, not the show, but the actual comic series, and why I think it continued to resonate and what its importance is historically. Please check that out. But I've been finding newer audiences and have the same kind of passionate response. And, I'm sure that this series is certainly going to get new readers to it. And also, I think there's a lot of people that fall into the category of like, oh yeah, Sandman. I know it's one of those ones I'm supposed to read, and then you get around to it. So yeah. Oh, good. Sorry.
No, I mean, that's exactly what happened. And now that I'm reading them, I'm kicking myself. It's like, you should have read these earlier. And I'm in the first few issues at the moment, and I'm already so immersed that it's impossible not to fall in love with this series, which again, I should have done way earlier, but hindsight.
There's no wrong time. So from that perspective, I think what we're going to do is talk about the series a little bit. I want to focus primarily on the actual experience of watching this series on its own merits. Though I do think it's worth discussing where it may appeal more or less to people who have read the whole run, people who have some interaction with it, or people who have no interaction with it at all. I think that's an interesting way to look at it. But one of the things that I think is really interesting about the way they want to approach the series and the way the comic starts out, DC Vertigo, that line that Sandman launched on was mostly, not entirely, mostly known. It was called mature reader content, but it was mostly because of horror reasons.
Right. I
And
remember
it's
that.
definitely like a horror show, but like the comic starts out pretty gnarly, like whatever, and the show's given us some, but like it really starts out even darker than the show has. So I think it's interesting how they're going to navigate kind of these horror tones, made slightly more palatable for larger audiences on Netflix.
Yeah. And I think it matters what platform it was actually produced in, because let's say a Sandman for primetime TV would be very different from the Sandman we're getting now to, let's say, a prestige Sandman that is on Showtime or RIP HBO,
Right. Right.
You'd get totally different things. And I think doing it on Netflix does allow for some of those horror elements, but I'm not sure how much we might get,
Right. I agree. I think it is a little threading of the needle, right? I think you're right. On an HBO or Showtime, it might push further down certain paths than others.
Yeah.
So though I'm not going to get in, but episode 3 does open up more of that. So before we get into like real specific details, give me your top line. Like, what's your level of enjoyment? You've watched 3 so far in total?
Yeah, I'm pacing myself.
Yeah. So I'm in the same boat. I watched these. So what's your? We'll get into individual episodes, everything. But like, are you loving? Are you liking it? Are you just give me your big picture take so far?
Big picture take. I love it, and nice. I love it, and I kind of knew I would, because God, I just eat up anything that's kind of a contemporary fairy tale, and Neil Gaiman nails it every time, especially in that genre. Everything from like Good Omens, American Gods, all that stuff is just such modern takes on fairy tales and mythos. And I think I'm in a time in my life right now where I want a little bit of escapism, but I also want something grounded and real. And I knew that this series was going to give me that and kind of fill that void. So I've been eating it up.
Nice. It's a really great thought. Gaiman's writing, his career has obviously spanned a lot of different genres, and a lot of more different mediums than genres. But I think that's a great summary, that what he is a modern storyteller in the fairy tale folklore, folk story, a lineage, and I think he would very proudly affirm that. I mean, I think that's what he's drawn to. And I think, as folks get further down this show or further along in the reading or whatever, I think that becomes more apparent. One of the things that so my top line is, I've really liked it. I broadly really liked episode 1. Thought episode 2 is good, and I had some specific moments I'll get into. But I kind of understood there's just stuff they had to set up, like just stuff they had to do.
There's definitely a purpose to episode 2 that you're not going to get the same punch as episode 1.
Yeah. And then episode 3 for me really soared. Episode 3 jumped a whole level. A part of that is just this cast is just dynamite. I mean, some of the actors, some of the best stacked, like a total stack deck. I agree. So that's part of it. But I loved this property for so long that I genuinely was nervous. It doesn't happen that often where I'm like, oh man, I hope this is good, because I've been waiting for so long. This it is an incredibly challenging adaptation. I mean, you are literally spanning realities. You are spanning, the streets of London to conceptual endless gods. I mean, it is all over the place. And I am very impressed with how well they've done that so far, and kept it as a relatively linear story, which the comic is not always as linear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally agree there. I would say that, I mean, coming into it as a, I'm going to call myself a blank slate viewer, right? The world building in episode one is incredible, and it really does, like, okay, you start in London, all of a sudden, like a little Ravens trip, you know, later, you're in this like surrealist universe, right, where dreams
Mm-hmm.
exist. And I think to bounce around like that so seamlessly is very unique to the show and very unique to the storytelling. But I think it's incredible to immerse a viewer already in almost like a weird timey-wimey travel through all these realms, because it can be a little, I mean, if anybody else did it, I think it would be really, really jerky and like you
Yeah.
don't know where you're at. Um, but I
Yeah.
think that they've done a pretty good job of
Yeah.
doing.
I think it's been critical that Gaiman himself has been involved. I do think,
Yeah, you said it.
and having the confidence of the writer involved, so that if you're making a decision, because there's some pretty substantial changes that we'll get into a little bit from the comics to the show, that are handled very like definitively and confidently, that uh if not the author's original voice in the mix, might have not worked as cleanly. And I think because they are from Gaiman himself, they succeed. So it's funny you say Raven. So I want to actually, that's one of the ones I want to talk about. We don't meet the Ravens till later. There are no Ravens, I think, even in the first like couple full story
No.
arcs of Sandman, right?
Mhm.
So bringing them in from episode one, and both functionally serving as a little bit of like camera, your where your eyes should follow the camera avatar kind of thing,
Yeah.
to allow for that kind of storytelling device that you're mentioning, and the way that they attached. I mean, essentially, we meet fairly emotionless Dream for the entirety of the first episode, and other than his brooding in the capture, but when we have the emotion of the so I think we're gonna get into spoilers now.
Yeah, it is
So
gonna be a
hey, we
spoiler
like it.
alert.
I'm not gonna
Brace
spoil
yourself.
things. So if you haven't watched anything at this point, now's a good time to dip out or go watch them and come back. When we you it's the first time we actually see an emotional response from him that gives him some connection. And in general, that's a challenge like throughout Dream as you get further into it. I mean, the aloofness is baked into the character for a lot of different reasons. So I thought that was a really important device to introduce much earlier in the series.
Yeah, totally agree there. I think in order for an audience to connect with a character like Dream, you have to have a through line of some sense of humanity, and that's through emotions, through feelings. And without that stake, without that like chink in the armor of this endless being, there's no way that we can really connect and feel for, I'm going to use a broad term here, hero through their journey,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Protagonist.
There's no
Sure.
connection. And I think that's really, really important, because with that loss, so soon in the first episode, you're invested. You care about Dream at that point,
Yeah.
because you felt that loss also, and that's
Yeah.
important to connect with the audience on that level.
The one of the things that I think is sort of the genius of the arc, and it goes back to a point you made earlier about sort of folklore, the fairy tale, these folk stories, is often the gods of old were written in such ways that they represented human failings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were parables and stories to teach us, greater than lessons to live better, essentially, right? That's the role of those stories, right? And Gaiman does a really, brilliant job of the endless, of the brothers, these immortal brothers and sisters being flawed, having their issues, having their personality traits. And Dream is in no way, you said, for lack of a term, a hero. He is not a hero, and I think the further we go, the more that will be obvious. You know, even that. I'm trying to remember if that's in 2 or 3. I don't want to blow it. Oh no, that's in 3. I won't get to it yet. But you know, and I think that's one of the reasons why, and this is the biggest change from the comics that I think we should spend a little time on, is the role of Corinthian, who, as far as we've gotten so far, is the villain essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Corinthian doesn't even appear in the first or in the first story arc and a half. And you know, this series has moved him front and center to the top of the experience. And one of the things that he is calling Sandman out on is, you know, he doesn't care about any of us. He gives that speech to Lucian.
Yeah.
When we get to Cain and Abel, you know, their disappointment with the decisions he's making, like this sense that like he doesn't care about his realm, he doesn't care about his people. And Lucian tells him in the first place, you know, don't leave. You know, this could be
yeah.
It's all about Sandman, and so I think that's a really important part. And I think that's why we've moved Corinthian to the top, because it does set up, even if Corinthian itself is this walking nightmare, it does set up the criticism of Dream.
Yeah. Well, it just makes them so much more of a, I don't know, just a better character. I think a lot of people are just tired of these infallible type, you know, characters in these shows where it's like, yeah, okay, yes, they're this endless being, they have all this power, whatever. But if you don't give them some real stakes, some real flaws, that, you know, you have a pretty flat story otherwise, you know, and you need that. And I totally can understand why the writers decided to kind of have a foil or a mirror to what Dream is doing.
One of the things that I thought, so one of the few things I am critical of, and I'm wondering, but and this is one of those ones where I want to hear from a non-reader if you have a different experience. In episode 2, with the gargoyle and the sort of absorbing of the power, that's a change, but that's not really the important part. That was one of those moments where, like, it felt a little hokey to me. Like, it was one of the few moments where, like, they hadn't earned. We didn't go through any kind of like emotional journey on that one to get to it.
Yeah.
Did that bother you at all, or is that, am I bringing too much history to that moment?
It bothered me in the sense that like they had to do away with Gregory, or bother me in the fact that they even had to shove that in there so early.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just if you're going to lose a character and have that be some kind of an emotional impact, it's hard. It just felt not earned. It's just very early.
I see. Okay, this is where we disagree.
Sure, go.
Because I want to say it was earned, but it was earned cheaply in terms of that trope where they kill off the dog. Everyone cares about the dog in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and Gregory they gave him like dog-like characteristics.
Oh yeah, totally.
So the fact that you're like, okay, I gotta go put down this dog for the mission to continue, of course I felt that. It's impossible not to. And yeah, it was hooky. It was hooky, but I was in it emotionally, I think, as a viewer, of course, because it fell into that trope. It's impossible not to feel something.
I'm a sociopath, apparently. So, and tone-wise, like, I don't know, what's my question? Tone-wise, do you feel like I think there's a challenge in a series like this, and it's a challenge in the books themselves, of switching between the emotional ride of it and sort of like the heady concepts being played with. Mm-hmm. Do you find yourself? I think they've done well. I'll put my cards on the table. I feel like they've done a pretty good job at not having you hang out in the heady concepts, and I think that's a tricky thing, because in the comics we live there for a little while, and I just don't think they play as well on screen. And I think they've purposely like backed off it, like they just accepted it's Dream, it's cool, whatever. And I think they've done a good job of kind of avoiding that. Have you found yourself kind of lost in the thinking, or have you just been riding it?
It's a little bit of both. I am a chronic overthinker when it comes to any piece of media that I can't help but like, what does this mean? Like, um, and yeah, for somebody who just wants to watch the show, I think the show does a really good job of keeping the story moving without you having to sit with the heaviness of what something might mean or the bigger concepts of things. But I think if you're looking for that, they're there.
Mm.
Um, for example, like Alex as a character, I think is a stand-in for humanity for all of us because when Dream in episode 1, I mean, he's just in this like glorified Pokemon ball the whole time.
Mhm.
Like he's
Mhm.
he's just hanging out. He doesn't say anything. There might be some voiceovers, but the protagonist doesn't do much. The story is progressed by his silence and his meeting of humanity. And what he's met of humanity is Alex's father, who is played by Charles Dance, who always plays the best dads on
The
TV
best.
ever.
Oh yeah. Yep. Warm,
Number
loving
one
fathers. Yep.
dad. But if you think about it in those terms, that he's only been exposed to humanity through two characters, one of them being completely terrible trash, garbage pile of a human, and then there's Alex, who I think is a stand-in for all of us,
Mm.
who we might have the best of intentions and we might be kind and be put upon by whatever is going on in our lives. At the end of the day, we might still do the very human choice of being completely self-serving.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the viewer can sit with and think about these bigger concepts. But that's me. That's how I
Yeah.
consume my
No,
media.
I mean, I don't think you're, well, it's not even wrong. I don't, I don't disagree with that experience. You had mentioned off air that there's a big difference in the comics of the show about to what level Alex is sympathetic. I mean,
Mhm.
there's a massive story difference in how his father dies in the comic versus there isn't that father son confrontation. It doesn't, um, he just dies because he gets old, and whereas like we see Burgess, in the show keep his sort of same level of wealth and fame and age and whatever to the ending of it. um that's certainly that's certainly crafted to create a more sympathetic Alex,
Yeah.
so that the Sandman's decision to kind of give him the perma nightmare is a more haunting thing and a more ambiguous move. Because like the moment where he says, "Look, I'll let you out. Just tell me you won't hurt us. Like that's all I want," and Sandman won't
Hmm.
give it. That's a much more. That's a much easier moral line for an audience to see one side or the other than, or sorry, I shouldn't say easier line. It's a much more what's the right term? Yeah, it just creates a much more sympathetic
Yeah.
relationship to Alex than you'd get in the comics. And I think I think is for the welcoming of a TV audience, as opposed to when you're reading in the comics and you're being delivered a horror book.
Right.
You know?
And oh God, and to get even broader, probably I'm getting into the weeds of things. It's
No,
just
no, get in the weeds. That's what we do.
it's just like how you consume this. And I'm not okay. I'm going to call it a piece of art because it is.
Sure,
If you're connecting
absolutely.
to it on an emotional level, it is a piece of art. And I know as literature wise, as comic books, they are wonderful pieces of art. But I think it also matters in terms of how you consume it. Like on a TV show, yeah, you can introduce these big concepts, but they're definitely not going to keep you there because in episodic TV, what you have like 45 minutes to kind of make your point and keep the story moving. And if the audience so wishes, you can introduce the little sprinklings of these concepts for them to kind of pick apart later. Whereas when you are reading a comic, you can pour over a page as quickly or as slowly as you want. That pacing is completely up to you in terms of what
Mm.
you're taking in when you're taking it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's an important thing to kind of touch upon because it does matter then how you have a live experience with the story
Mm-hmm.
also.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it kind of goes back to your point of like, do you think they're like having you hang out in these big concepts at all? And I think the best a show like this can do is introduce the flash of the concept, but you definitely can't just live in it like you
Hmm.
can in those stories, because you can pick it up or not, however, whenever you want. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be very curious to see one of the defining features of the 75 issue run of the series on the whole is the there are issues that just are essentially like one shots. I mean, they fit in the continuity of the larger picture, but like entire issues that really are fairly self-contained stories. I'd be very curious to see if the show uh, plays with that at all. If we get essentially what would be the TV equivalent, like bottle episodes or whatever, isolated episodes, um, because usually they are created to give you another perspective of how the world is experiencing some of these things that are happening on these metaphysical planes
Yeah.
instead of just kind of traveling with Sandman through them. So they're used as a device. I don't know if they resonate as fully on TV, but I'm curious. I'll be curious to see
I
that.
do wonder, with something like that, if they would do it in kind of a vignette type thing. You know how you have those movies where it's like you have 1,000 characters and all of them are going to meet up at a certain point, but they're all having their independent stories. I think that's one way to do it.
Mhm.
Or they might not bother with it at all because you can't adapt, you can't be completely faithful to
Yeah,
the source material.
I mean the most famous uh, single issue of Sandman is Sandman 19, which is a Midsummer Night's Dream. That is it's a brilliant piece, and but it really is a fully isolated story within the larger
Mm,
context. So I don't know if they're going to touch that or not. But that's not happening this season anyway. So it's a
yeah.
question for down the road. Now I'll say this. One of the things that I when I was first learning about the series, I thought was fascinating, and I always keep it in mind when I'm introduced to anything that Gaiman's putting forward. Um, so when you get to Season of Mists, which is the fourth story arc, okay, it is to me the apex of the series. It is like the highest high point the series gets, and Gaiman in an interview said something along the lines of like, I knew I had a hit with that. Like I knew that was a home run. I purposely didn't start the series there. He didn't. I mean, I guess it's a little bit of like him coming out of like post-punk England and not wanting the commercialism of it, but like
Yeah.
I think it's also like he wanted his audience to work for it a little bit and get you in through like the grind of what he's going to put you through until he gave you like the big pop sensation moment, which is what
Yeah.
I think that arc is. So I try to think about that in the way he approaches anything. Um, so for example, I imagine this season might be not harder watch, but like we may work for it a little bit more and get goodies in future seasons.
Yeah.
Like that would make some sense to me. So it may be that kind of stuff is a couple years
Yeah.
down the road.
God, I hope so. I hope that's, I like to, hold my goodies. Tell later, because
Delayed
it
gratification.
yeah, because it makes the viewing experience, and it makes taking in the story so much more gratifying. And this is me complaining. I think some of the things that people always complain about is like, oh, pacing, people don't get to the point and blah blah blah. But I'm like, it's about the journey. It's like how you get there,
Mhm,
which is
mhm.
so gratifying to a story, which I think a lot of people are kind of missing out on. So I do hope people pick up on that there's going to be like something happening, but the momentum has to get you there first.
Yeah, I mean, it's this is anecdotal. I haven't done a deep dive. It does seem that like consensus early word is like people are loving it, as are we.
Yeah.
So like we shouldn't be surprised about that, but like you never know, right? But it does seem to be like a pretty broad approval rating. And I uh, my wife, who's not a comic book reader at all, has really been enjoying the series and just
Oh,
finds it
cool.
compelling in its own right. And not the least of which is some of the acting. Certainly, I want to talk like a little bit about episode 3. And I know I said I won't spoil episode 3, so I'm gonna try to get us to not talk about what is happening in those scenes,
Okay.
but just talking about it. So I mean, first of all, David Thewlis is like one of my favorite actors. Like I'll watch him read a phone book. He's one of those actors for
Yeah.
me. The character he plays in the comics is like literally like a disfigured monster. He's not. They're giving him more of that energy in the show than in visual representation. But the sort of incredible scene between him and Ethel and his mom, his mom, that
Mhm.
scene doesn't exist in the comics, which is sort of
Really?
it never happens. She
Whoa.
dies off camera. You never see them. I mean,
Oh,
there's like you sort of see them interact, but like you don't even really see that. So I think that's been the best scene of the entire show so far.
yeah.
So that's kind of amazing. And that once that happened, and again, like for my wife watching, going like, oh, okay, like this has that kind of a gear, you know, um, that gives me tremendous optimism moving forward. That
Yeah.
like when they're going to make changes for the sake of the storytelling, they're going to deliver some of the best stuff. Oh, okay, cool, game on.
Yeah, because that scene seemed so pivotal for those
Yeah,
characters.
it was my favorite scene of the first three episodes.
Wow,
Period.
that's incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
So I
Cool.
thought that was really cool. And the same thing with Corinthian at the beginning, episode one. Like Corinthian never goes and talks to Burgess.
Yeah.
That never happens, you know. So I think it's really interesting. Are you? So let me ask you. This is. I'm taking advantage of the fact that you haven't read them.
Okay.
Um, what do you make so far of references by other characters to the siblings of the Endless? Does that mean anything to you at this point? Is it like they feel like do you make anything of that?
If anything, the little I know or the least I know, the more excited I am
Mm-hmm.
because I what I know of Dream is already so whimsical, so like you're like,
I'm like the reverse mirrors mess me up where I'm like, what's going I can't okay, there we go.
you should just like
Sorry.
cut to the
I,
side,
I
just live
know.
with the
I had
sassy.
it. That's what I had. Oh yeah, just throw it back. Yeah. Anyway. Go
I
ahead.
think
Sorry. I'm
the less I
sorry.
know about them, the better because I do want to be surprised. I do want to be just like it's so nice to be immersed into something that you don't know anything about because that excitement is just so unique to that
Mm-hmm.
experience. And I think
Mm-hmm.
when we meet desire, when we meet death, it's going to be so cool because you're like, who are the enigma
Mm-hmm.
is exciting in itself. Because having met Dream or what we know of Dream so far in the story is so interesting that it's impossible not to be interested in his siblings because it's like what's going on there. They have their own realms. What is that about?
Right.
So I'm really really psyched to continue the show and see what's up with these other realms and these other siblings.
Yeah. And what we I don't there may be surprises to come when I believe what is confirmed and what we do know are the other there's 7 endless. There's 2 that I believe are confirmed for the season, which are the 2 you mentioned, which is Desire and Death. And we've seen clips with both of those actors in the trailer. So that's not spoiling anything. I don't know if they're going to touch on any of the endless this season. Um, what is interesting, Dream's relationship to those 2 siblings is dramatically different. So that'll
Mm,
be really interesting to see how they. I mean, really, those are kind of like the polar opposites of his relationships with other members of his family. Um, the right now they've they've used it mostly in that scene with Lucian where she suggests like ask for help, why don't you get some
yeah,
help, and he's like, I was there for 100 years, they didn't come and help me, they could help me. So they're using that certainly to set up to give you insight to his relationship to them. But also, again, going back to our whole like our flawed protagonist, our flawed, godlike creature.
hmm
Uh, he doesn't ask for help. He's going to do it all on his own. He isn't going to worry about anybody else's path but his own. And that is definitely a theme that carries its way through the entire series.
yeah,
So how they continue to shape that and present that, and I would say it's frankly integral to the journey he takes over the 75 issues. So it's interesting they use it that way. I guess what I was a little bit of a leading question for me which is just to say they keep inferring like it's not the first time this has happened. It's not the
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Which I guess the reason I was asking is like that's important stuff. I know what they're getting at because I've read it. Whatever. It feels a little like heavy-handed, but but maybe you haven't been experiencing that way. In which case, great.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who that other endless was. So I'm like,
Right.
who is it?
Right.
And also, I don't know if you thought about this at all, but I know he sounded kind of salty, saying, "Well, I was in there for 100 years and nobody came looking for me."
Mm-hmm.
But what's 100 years to an endless being?
No, yeah.
Truthfully,
Mm-hmm.
like maybe they're like, I don't know, you were gone for 5 minutes. Like, relax. Come looking for me
I
now.
know I totally agree. Actually, if we're doing some nitpicking stuff, that's one of my nits to pick. I do find it a little bit like there should have been some addressing of the fact of like you got me here for 100 years, but you think you're waiting me out? Like literally, it's a blink for me,
Yeah.
100 years.
Yeah,
You know, like
so the fact that he would be mad that his siblings come looking for him for
yeah,
100 years, I'm like, that's a drop in the bucket.
yeah. No, and I think it's one of the reasons they kept trying to say this, but I wish they had done it even more. Is the voiceover stuff kept talking about like he didn't care that he had me there for 100 years. He didn't care what was happening to his world. I wish they had done more with that. That's so the
Mhm.
presence of the sleeping sickness, of the people not dreaming, of the people, the way that impacted people's lives and how that intertwined. I thought they kind of rushed through that when I think that could have been a little bit more
Yeah.
impactful.
In
Um,
in terms of differences, yeah, like the little bit that I have read,
yeah, they
they
do a lot of that early on.
they do like they bring you through this like they're these people's entire lifetimes with the sleeping sickness, and you just don't get the sadness and the tragedy of that
Absolutely.
in the TV
No.
show at all, which is too bad because it is pretty gnarly.
Yeah. Well, they gave a whole, I mean, they gave a whole episode to essentially the Burgess story, which like really, and what's funny is they found a way to give a whole episode to it and didn't really embellish that much. I don't know how it was good, like construct, but like it's a few pages in the comics,
Yep.
you
And I'm like,
know?
how did you make this like a
Yeah.
2 episode arc? But all right. I mean, I loved it, so I mean, I should
Yeah.
shut up because I totally loved it.
No, that's cool. It's I don't know, just it's fun to talk about regardless. I'm just trying to see notes here I had to myself. 1 second here. Just want to not miss it. I don't know, blah, 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 blah. Sorry, I know this week's for riveting viewership as I talk to myself, guys. What do you think of just casting across the board? Any like superlatives? Any people you thought were fantastic or just felt a little off? Or I mean, the
So
talent level is
far,
very high,
yeah,
but
I'm like, God, this cast is stacked.
it really
And
is.
I mean, my expectations acting wise are pretty high with a cast like this. Um, I don't know. It's terrible, but I feel like the only I was kind of so about them was Alex. Uh,
Mm,
but I don't know. I can't even tell you why that is, but I think comparatively, like you have Charles Dance, um, even Tom Sturridge is great. And I think I saw a video not that long ago of Neil Gaiman saying that they kind of knew that he would be their dream, but then they went ahead and like auditioned and saw a bunch of other people. Um, so I think
yeah,
the pick was just it's stellar. And
yeah,
if there's one person I'm also very excited to see, it's Gwendolyn Christie,
yeah.
because
I think she's gonna
she could
crush
be in
it.
anything, and I'll watch it. I
Yeah,
love
I
her.
think she's gonna crush it. So, so full disclosure, I don't love the Sandman cat, like the actual casting of
Okay,
Sandman. I don't hate it or anything. Um, uh, I think I would have liked somebody who pushed against the work just a little bit because the trap of the role is the stillness, is the emo, is the moodiness, and I
yeah,
feel like we lead all the way into it, and then that leads in some moments to be less interesting than I think they could be. It's not that I think it's bad or anything. I just
yeah,
and I know like if, to give this some context, I know like when they were talking about doing it like 20 years ago, Johnny Depp was very like often associated with the role.
mm,
So whether you think that'd be good or not is a different conversation. But like the way he can push through the type of the kind of email to give it
yeah.
something quirkier and fuller, I would have liked to have seen that a little bit.
No, I
Um,
totally hear what you're saying. I mean, if I had like one critique about that casting in terms of characterization, having been exposed to the few pages of Sandman that I have read, is I guess I wanted a little bit more creepiness because
yeah.
Tom is a handsome person,
Hmm.
um, and I think there's who is it? I think it's either Alex or somebody else who says it in the comic books, but they're talking about his creepy eyes, Dream's creepy eyes,
Hmm.
and now and then you get a little flashes of like the shiny
Right.
eyes. But when you look at the art of the Sandman, of
Right.
his like corporeal form, he is really creepy.
Yeah,
And
for
I
sure.
wish it would have done that a little bit more.
Yeah. I think
You
in
know?
general they eased up off there's a certain like pulling back, even like the Cain and Abel, though I loved the sort of like the flash of sadistic Cain, and the
Mhm.
murder, the anger. But like even that could have been a little more ferocious. Even that um the witches were great. I have no or the Furies. I have no notes, no notes. But like even Lucian, who obviously isn't a scary character or anything. It's like a sort of like a wornness to
Yeah.
Lucian that the they had Lucian much more like kind of put together. So there's a little bit of like softening of edges that seems to be a choice across the board, and
Yeah.
it may be accessibility choices.
And I am, yeah, I'm wondering the same thing, is that they're giving all the characters a little bit more of a polish
Mhm.
to make it more, accessible to
Yeah,
all viewers, because you don't want just the comic book audience. You want to appeal to a wider audience because at the end of the day, it's a product and it needs to be consumed and
yeah.
money, blah, 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 blah. So I am
And
wondering
again,
if that's why. Yeah.
yeah, and again, it's nitpicking. Like I'm not saying like I didn't like that. I just mean like I broadly speaking, I'm very pleased, very very pleased with the casting. Um, well, so I'm trying to think. I want to talk a little bit more about three, and I'm trying to figure out how to talk about it. So I really do think it like hit another gear,
Yeah.
um, as we get introduced to other really major characters that stay with us much longer than the Burgess family, much longer than some of these other characters that really do, like Hetty will stay with us the entirety of the arc. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
The entirety of the run, some things like that. So I'm trying to think of how best to do it, but I thought if three represents, first of all, I thought it was funny. Like I thought it was like legit. Like the humor was clipping at a more comfortable pace.
Yeah.
If episode three represents the blend of horror, action, acting, comedy, then like we're in for just an awesome ride.
God,
That
yeah, it makes me so
that
excited.
tone. So if you've just seen the first two episodes and you're watching this and you're like, yeah, just like let's see where you're at after three would be
Yeah.
my top
Come
picks
back
because
to
it
us
really,
after you watch
yeah.
three because it's going to be a good time. Yeah.
So anything I didn't hit on or thoughts you wanted to explore, or anything you wanted to get at about these three episodes that I didn't ask about?
Oh, I guess I'm trying to see because I also
Have your
have
notes?
notes. I have
Go
the
for it.
notes.
Go
Yeah.
for it.
I mean, we touched on a lot of I want to see. Oh, just the hubris. Also, just it's a small thought, but the hubris of anybody calling themselves the Magus gives me like gives me you know gives me
Yeah.
those vibes of people that refer to themselves in third person. It's
Oh
like
yeah.
very bad. I'm like already like who why who are you, why are you
Wait.
calling
So
yourself
is that in the comics? No, that's an invention for the show, right?
I think so,
Yeah.
but it does lead
No,
into
it's great.
that time, because the whole Aleister Crowley, like historically speaking, for anybody
Hmm.
who's like into history, but like at that time in England, spiritualism, paganism was like a huge thing. Aleister Crowley, who was
See,
a
look, we
historical
learned things here
figure,
in Fresh Take.
it- yeah, like he was super into that, and I don't know. I think he had something to do with the Satanic Bible, loosely. I forget, but it's so funny that those folks would have monikers like that, which
Oh,
is
totally.
so funny to me. Just so funny.
It's so good. Well, I mean, I think you're so spot on. I mean, look, the hubris. He's trying to capture death.
Yeah, like what?
And he failed and just got Dream, and then didn't care about. I know it's great. It's such a great change to further emphasize it, and even like the parties, like that's not from the
No,
comic. Like
you
there's
don't see
sort of
that at
these
all.
like, you know, and the cash that people have to pay to be the parties, and the women, and the blah blah blah. You know, the whole thing. That's all invention for the show, to show that selfishness and indulgence, which I think worked very very well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's a great point. It's a great point.
I am wondering though what you thought about. I mean, it is something that we're watching at home on TV, but the theatrical scope of it, because there's some really beautiful shots in this TV show.
Mm-hmm.
One of them specifically is almost at the end of episode one, where Dream comes back
Mm-hmm.
to the dreaming, to his
Mm-hmm.
realm, and there's that beautiful shot of the gate, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like you start from the bottom and it pans up, and I know I read somewhere that people were like, "Oh, there's too much building," and these could be people just like random reviewers just nitpicking at this show.
The criticism that there's too
Yeah,
much time spent world building.
there's too much world building,
Hmm.
which, and I think I read that on IndieWire of all places, but
Is that criticism? And forgive me if you don't remember. That's fine too. Is that criticism coming from in relationship to the comic or in the show itself? Because like in the show itself, I don't feel like that at all. I feel like
yeah,
actually they're moving fairly quickly through that stuff.
yeah, and
Um,
this is what I mean is that like the whole impatience of people not of people wanting the point of things really, really
hmm,
quickly without, having an exploratory curiosity about this world,
right.
which, you know nothing about it if you're coming in fresh. But
Well,
I
that's a
know I
little
read that and I found that so weird.
right. Well, I mean, that touches upon, although I have a different take, that touches upon my criticism of episode two, which I
Okay.
did feel was like a little like there's a lot of function, a lot of
Yeah.
functionality, a lot of like, okay, we need to meet this thing and set up this thing and do this thing, and not that I thought it was bad. Again, you know, maybe episode one was an 8.5, and this episode two was a 7
Yeah.
or something like that. You know what I mean? I'm not like, um, uh, but I do. So there was some of that, but like to be fair, I think they're covering like 14 issues of comics, and they're doing it in 10 episodes of TV. They are gonna have to like crash through
They're gonna
some of
have to.
it,
Yeah.
and they're inventing some new stuff too. So like, they're gonna have to rip through some stuff. That said, um, I don't know. We could have spent like a full episode just explaining the rules of his like castle, and I would have been fine.
Yeah.
So
Same.
maybe I'm not the right
I would have
audience
been
for that.
happy to be there for
I mean,
several
as
episodes because
as
it's
a comic
wonderful.
reader, I found a true joy in when they were showing the sort of the castle pre-fall. I'm trying to
Yeah.
remember what the sequence of watching all this was, but and the sort of three guardians, which we'll meet later, that are like the protectors of the castle. Like they took the time to do like that level of detail. And as you're being like Merv the pumpkin, pumpkinhead guys sweeping, and like, I mean, they had so much of that in there, of that little like, don't worry, this is all coming stuff to the readers. I thought that was um, a pretty efficient way of saying like, hey, don't worry, this like visual world building stuff is going to be there. But like never for a second did I think the other side of it. Like never for a second was I was like, too much world building.
Yeah.
Like
It is just funny
that
to
was not
think
something I
about
experienced.
that someone sat there and then wrote a whole article about like, whoa, I don't want to know anything about this fantastic imagined
No.
world, which is
I mean, I get the concerns of adaptation and propulsion, right? Like I
yeah.
get like that. I think was always going to be the story, and frankly, what I was most concerned about until the last trailer, and then I felt more confident. The first kind of teasers they showed, I was like, I'm a little worried that they're not gonna, that we're gonna get lost in the weeds and not like on the show. The difference of the TV versus the comic is like we are going to need some propulsion, but
Mm,
like now I'm not worried about that at all. And if anything, I'm on the other side. Like I thought they were like propulsing too fast. You know,
Yeah,
like I
yeah,
could
yeah.
have slowed down. So that was a really long way to answer your question and say, no, that was not bothering me in the least little bit.
Cool, because I was like, am I the one who's just like way too into the show and not critically engaging and people are like too much world building? Because I love that stuff.
Yeah.
And like you said, I could spend a whole episode. We could like if they just wanted to talk about the castle or what's going on in the dreaming, I would have been so happy. I've been like, yes, sign me up.
You haven't gotten to in your reading, have you gotten to the Sandman's reacquisition of the ruby, or have you not gotten to that yet?
No, no, not quite yet. No.
Then I'll leave it. We'll talk about it down the road. I'm going to be very curious to see how they. I can't imagine that they aren't going to have to substantially change that,
Mm.
or if they don't, we're really going to be talking about it for a while because it's going to be gnarly. But we'll get to that later. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. I'm so glad you were able to join us. I hope you will come back. And so, hey, folks that follow me, go follow at Chatter and Jax on TikTok. And I think what we're going to do, I'll have other shows between now and then. I have actually a number of, I've been really fortunate to have some great conversations recently with people who are writing, drawing, or both, some independent comics. I think I'm going to have them come on and talk about their comics, but also their creative process. And we're going to get into a little bit the sort of the act of creating and talk about that a little bit. But specific to Sandman, I'm going to give everybody a week and a half or so, and we'll do a full season review and probably have a few guests on that one so we can kind of get a bigger dialogue going. So thanks everybody out there for watching. Thanks so much, Jackie, for joining us, and we'll see you next time, nerds.
Bye. Yeah, bye.